The Thunder of Waterloo. By B.M. Levin. Chapter 1, The Gathering Storm. The dark clouds of war hung over Europe once again. Captain Henri Duval, a veteran of Napoleon's campaigns, felt the weight of his years in the army. France had seen glory and devastation in equal measure, and now, as he rode through the scorched countryside, he wondered what lay ahead. As orders came to march towards Brussels, the final confrontation seemed inevitable. Henri met with his young lieutenant, Arnaud, and surveyed the green recruits who would soon face their first taste of battle. The veteran soldiers prepared with grim efficiency, sharpening bayonets and cleaning rifles. Henri's doubts about the emperor's grand vision grew heavier with every passing moment, but his duty was clear. At the chapter's end, Napoleon addresses the reader. War is not a game of chance. It is the art of those who know how to command fate. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 2, Echoes of Glory. As the French army marched toward Waterloo, Henri reflected on the battles that had shaped his life. From the frozen fields of Russia to the triumphs in Italy, Napoleon's star had once seemed invincible. But the echoes of past glory faded as the long road to Brussels stretched ahead. Henri conversed with soldiers who spoke of Napoleon with reverence, but there were murmurs of doubt as well. The emperor had returned from exile, but was he still the leader they had once believed in? For Henri, the answer was no longer clear. The world was changing, and even a man like Napoleon could not command time. A true leader is one who, under adversity, rises even stronger. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 3, The Emperor's Return. The army reached the encampment where Napoleon himself awaited. The air crackled with energy as soldiers stood straighter in the presence of their emperor. Henri, standing among his men, watched as Napoleon addressed the troops, his voice firm and full of the charisma that had once inspired nations. Napoleon's speech stirred the hearts of his soldiers, but Henri could see something different in his eyes, a weariness, perhaps, or an understanding that this might be his final stand. The emperor met Henri's gaze briefly, and in that moment, Henri wondered if Napoleon knew the doubts stirring within his soul. The battlefield is a scene of constant chaos. The winner will be the one who controls that chaos, both his own and the enemy's. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 4, The Weight of Command. Henri felt the growing burden of command as the battle loomed closer. He had lost men before, but something about this coming fight felt different. The British and Prussian armies were formidable foes, and the soldiers under his command would need every ounce of courage to survive. Lieutenant Arnaud expressed his own fears during a quiet moment before the march. Henri reassured him, though he himself remained uncertain. His thoughts turned again to Napoleon. Was the emperor leading them to victory, or into a final, tragic defeat? Courage isn't having the strength to go on, it is going on when you don't have strength. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 5, The First Skirmish. The first shots rang out at Quatre Bras. Henri's regiment was deployed on the left flank, holding the line against British forces. Cannon fire boomed in the distance, and the air filled with smoke and screams. Henri ordered his men forward, their bayonets gleaming as they charged into battle. The clash was brutal and disorganized, but the French soldiers held their ground. Henri fought fiercely, yet each life taken weighed heavier on his conscience. As the skirmish ended, he looked out over the wounded and dead, knowing that this was only the beginning. Death is nothing, but to live defeated and inglorious is to die daily. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 6, The Emperor's Strategy. That evening, Henri was summoned to a war council. Napoleon laid out his plan for the coming battle at Waterloo. His strategy was meticulous, but Henri noticed the tension in the room. Some generals questioned the timing, the weather, and the morale of the troops. Napoleon spoke with confidence, but Henri's doubts lingered. As they departed, the emperor pulled Henri aside for a brief, private word. You've seen more than most, Captain Duval. Do you still believe in victory? Henri hesitated before replying, I believe in the men, sire. Napoleon nodded, but the question remained unanswered. Victory belongs to the most persevering. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 7, The Night Before. The night before the battle, the camp was alive with tension. Henri sat by a fire with his men, sharing a final meal before the coming storm. Soldiers laughed nervously, shared stories, and polished their weapons, but the weight of what lay ahead was inescapable. Henri exchanged few words with Arnaud but could sense the young lieutenant's fear. As he looked across the camp, he wondered how many of these men would see another dawn. The clouds overhead threatened rain, and Henri knew that tomorrow, all their fates would be decided. In war, the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 8, The Battle Begins. On the 18th of June, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo commenced. The French artillery opened fire, and soon the entire battlefield was a cacophony of violence. Henri led his men into the fray, the roar of cannon and musket fire deafening around them. Soldiers fell in waves, and the air was thick with smoke and blood. Napoleon's forces pushed forward, but the British stood firm. Henri's regiment found itself caught in a brutal struggle against Wellington's lines. The battlefield became a hellish landscape, and Henri knew this would be a fight to the death. The strong man is the one who is able to intercept at will the communication between the senses and the mind. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 9, A Glimpse of Defeat. As the hours wore on, the tide began to turn against the French. The Prussian army had arrived on the battlefield, catching Napoleon's forces from the east. Henri fought desperately, rallying his men as they were pushed back, inch by inch. The chaos of battle engulfed him. At one point, Henri was separated from his unit, surrounded by British soldiers. He fought for his life, his sword flashing in the dimming light of the afternoon. But with each passing moment, the prospect of defeat became more real. A soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 10, The Emperor's Last Charge. Napoleon, seeing the situation grow desperate, ordered a final cavalry charge. The Imperial Guard, the elite of the French army, rode forward in one last bid to break the British lines. Henri watched as they galloped toward the enemy, but even from a distance, he could see it was too late. The British held firm, and the Prussians continued to advance. The Emperor's face, usually so composed, now showed the first signs of doubt. The battle was slipping away, and even Napoleon's genius could not turn the tide. There are only two forces that unite men, fear and interest. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 11, Retreat. As dusk fell, the French lines began to crumble. Henri, wounded and exhausted, ordered his men to retreat. The battlefield was a graveyard of shattered dreams and broken bodies. Soldiers fled in every direction, and for the first time in his life, Henri understood the true horror of defeat. Napoleon's army was in disarray, and the emperor himself was forced to flee. Henri gathered the remnants of his regiment and made his way toward the French border. The long, painful march away from Waterloo had begun. Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 12, The Fall of an Empire. In the days that followed, news of the defeat spread like wildfire across Europe. Napoleon's empire was crumbling, and the Allies closed in from all sides. Henri returned to Paris, but the city was no longer the same. The emperor was forced to abdicate, and France stood at the edge of a new era. Henri felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. The war was over, but at what cost? He had served the emperor faithfully, but now, like so many others, he was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered world. It is not the desire for power, but the fear of losing it, that drives men to act. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 13, Reflections of a Soldier. As Henri returned to civilian life, he struggled with the memories of battle. The faces of the men who had fallen under his command haunted him, and the questions that had plagued him throughout the campaign now came rushing back. What had all the bloodshed been for? He wandered the streets of Paris, observing the changes around him. Napoleon had been exiled once again, this time to Street Helena. Henri found himself questioning not only the emperor's legacy, but his own place in the world. Great ambition is the passion of a great character. Those endowed with it may perform very good or very bad acts. Napoleon Bonaparte. Chapter 14, The Emperor's Farewell. Months later, Henri received a letter from a former comrade who had accompanied Napoleon into exile. The letter recounted the emperor's reflections on his life, his battles, and his final defeat. Henri read the words carefully, wondering what made a person have so much ambition, dedication, and determination, like him. My life wasn't so bad, after all. Napoleon Bonaparte.